All right, all right, all right. We are at the 8:30 mark. Greetings and welcome once again for the third time. What's today? On the fifth day of this month, January. And we are on time. That's right. Welcome, everybody. This is Amunia Israel, Solomon's 101 Lev Project Special, fourth year anniversary of the Lev Project. We are on chapter 7 of Uncle Tom's Cabin. And we're going to kind of see here. And by the way, if you're trying to tune in and sometimes YouTube doesn't give you the notifications, you have to click not only subscribe, but you have to click the little belly thing so that you'll know exactly when we're going on so that you can tune in if you are available at the time that the broadcast starts. And so to recap, we are on, yes, I believe it's chapter 7. Let me just all the way make sure. Yesterday, we did 3 chapters. We were looking at what was going on with Eliza. She has decided to run away. It has been discovered, according to the narrative, her mistress is rooting her on. They are delaying Haley, the slave master. They're delaying him so that she can have enough time to run off. Tom is not leaving. He is standing still. And hold on. He's standing still. Yeah, we're on chapter 7. So he's standing still. And what else is happening? He's already sold, and the slave master is ready to collect his goods. So without further ado, let's see what's going on with Sister Eliza. Let's see if she escapes. All right. So we're going to press play. And if you're new to this conversation, if you have any questions, comments, or thoughts as we're listening to this, just put it in the box. And after the chapter, we'll go ahead and discuss it. All right. Let's get it.
Chapter 7. The Mother's Struggle. It is impossible to conceive of a human creature more wholly desolate and forlorn than Eliza when she turned her footsteps from Uncle Tom's cabin. Her husband's suffering and dangers, and the danger of her child, all blended in her mind, with a confused and stunning sense of the risk she was running in leaving the only home she had ever known and cutting loose from the protection of a friend whom she loved and revered. Then there was the parting from every familiar object, the place where she had grown up, the trees under which she had played, the groves where she had walked many an evening in happier days by the side of her young husband. Everything, as it lay in the clear, frosty starlight, seemed to speak reproachfully to her, and ask her whither could she go from a home like that. But stronger than all was maternal love, wrought into a paroxysm of frenzy by the near approach of a fearful danger. Her boy was old enough to have walked by her side, and in an indifferent case she would only have led him by the hand. But now the bare thought of putting him out of her arms made her shudder, and she strained him to her bosom with a convulsive grasp as she went rapidly forward. The frosty ground creaked beneath her feet, and she trembled at the sound. Every quaking leaf and fluttering shadow sent the blood backward to her heart and quickened her footsteps. She wondered within herself at the strength that seemed to be come upon her, for she felt the weight of her boy as if it had been a feather, and every flutter of fear seemed to increase the supernatural power that bore her on, while from her pale lips burst forth, in frequent ejaculations, the prayer to a friend above, "Lord, help! Lord, save me!" If it were your Harry, Mother, or your Willie, that were going to be torn from you by a brutal traitor tomorrow morning, if you had seen the man and heard that the papers were signed and delivered, and you had only from 12 o'clock till morning to make good your escape, how fast could you walk? How many miles could you make in those few brief hours, with the darling at your bosom, the little sleepy head on your shoulder, the small, soft arms trustingly holding on to your neck? For the child slept. At first, the novelty and alarm kept him waking, but his mother so hurriedly repressed every breath or sound, and so assured him that if he were only still, she would certainly save him, that he clung quietly round her neck, only asking, as he found himself sinking to sleep, "Mother, I don't need to keep awake, do I?" "No, my darling, sleep if you want to." "But, Mother, if I do get asleep, you won't let him get me." "No, so may God help me," said his mother, with a paler cheek and a brighter light in her large dark eyes. "You're sure, ain't you, Mother?" "Yes, sure," said the mother, in a voice that startled herself, for it seemed to her to come from a spirit within that was no part of her. And the boy dropped his little weary head on her shoulder and was soon asleep. How the touch of those warm arms, the gentle breathings that came in her neck, seemed to add fire and spirit to her movements. It seemed to her as if strength poured into her in electric streams from every gentle touch and movement of the sleeping, confiding child. Sublime is the dominion of the mind over the body, that for a time can make flesh and nerve impregnable, and string the sinews like steel, so that the weak become so mighty. The boundaries of the farm, the grove, the woodlot, passed by her dizzily as she walked on. And still she went, leaving one familiar object after another, slacking not, pausing not, till reddening daylight found her many a long mile from all traces of any familiar objects upon the open highway. She had often been with her mistress to visit some connections in the little village of T, not far from the Ohio River, and knew the road well. To go thither, to escape across the Ohio River, were the first hurried outlines of her plan of escape. Beyond that, she could only hope in God. When horses and vehicles began to move along the highway with that alert perception peculiar to a state of excitement, and which seems to be a sort of inspiration, she became aware that her headlong pace and distracted air might bring on her remark and suspicion. She therefore put the boy on the ground, and, adjusting her dress and bonnet, she walked on at as rapid a pace as she thought consistent with the preservation of appearances. In her little bundle she had provided a store of cakes and apples, which she used as expedients for quickening the speed of the child, rolling the apples some yards before them, when the boy would run with all his might after it. And this ruse, often repeated, carried them over many a half-mile. After a while they came to a thick patch of woodland, through which murmured a clear brook. As the child complained of hunger and thirst, she climbed over the fence with him, and sitting down behind a large rock which concealed them from the road, she gave him a breakfast out of her little package. The boy wondered and grieved that she could not eat, and when, putting his arms round her neck, he tried to wedge some of his cake into her mouth, it seemed to her that the rising in her throat would choke her. "No, no, Harry, darling. Mother can't eat till you are safe. We must go on, till we come to the river." And she hurried again into the road, and again constrained herself to walk regularly and composedly forward. She was many miles past any neighborhood where she was personally known. If she should chance to meet any who knew her, she reflected that the well-known kindness of the family would be of itself a blind to suspicion, as making it an unlikely supposition that she could be a fugitive. As she was also so white as not to be known as of colored lineage without a critical survey, and her child was white also, it was much easier for her to pass on unsuspected. On this presumption, she stopped at noon at a neat farmhouse to rest herself and buy some dinner for her child and self. For as the danger decreased with the distance, the supernatural tension of the nervous system lessened, and she found herself both weary and hungry. The good woman, kindly and gossiping, seemed rather pleased than otherwise with having somebody come in to talk with, and accepted, without examination, Eliza's statement that she was going on a little piece to spend a week with her friends, all which she hoped in her heart might prove strictly true. An hour before sunset she entered the village of T by the Ohio River, weary and footsore, but still strong in heart. Her first glance was at the river, which lay, like Jordan, between her and the Canaan of liberty on the other side. It was now early spring, and the river was swollen and turbulent. Great cakes of floating ice were swinging heavily to and fro in the turbid waters. Owing to the peculiar form of the shore on the Kentucky side, the land bending far out into the water, the ice had been lodged and detained in great quantities, and the narrow channel which swept round the bend was full of ice, piled one cake over another, thus forming a temporary barrier to the descending ice, which lodged and formed a great undulating raft, filling up the whole river and extending almost to the Kentucky shore. Eliza stood for a moment contemplating this unfavorable aspect of things, which she saw at once must prevent the usual ferry boat from running, and then turned into a small public house on the bank to make a few inquiries. The hostess, who was busy in various fizzing and stewing operations over the fire, preparatory to an evening meal, stopped with a fork in her hand as Eliza's sweet and plaintive voice arrested her. "What is it?" she said. "Isn't there any ferry or boat that takes people over to B now?" she said. "No, indeed," said the woman. "The boats have stopped running." Eliza's look of dismay and disappointment struck the woman, and she said inquiringly, "Maybe you're wanting to get over? Anybody sick? You seem mighty anxious." "I've got a child that's very dangerous," said Eliza. "I never heard of it till last night, and I've walked quite a piece today in hopes to get to the ferry." "Well, now, that's unlucky," said the woman, whose motherly sympathies were much aroused. "I'm really concerned for you. Solomon," she called from the window towards a small back building. A man in leather apron and very dirty hands appeared at the door. "I say, Sol," said the woman, "is that our man going to tote them barrels over tonight?" "He said he should try, if 'twas any way prudent," said the man. "There's a man apiece down here that's going over with some truck this evening, if he dares to. He'll be in here to supper tonight, so you'd better sit down and wait. That's a sweet little fellow," added the woman, offering him a cake. But the child, wholly exhausted, cried with weariness. "Poor fellow, he isn't used to walking, and I've hurried him on so," said Eliza. "Well, take him into this room," said the woman, opening into a small bedroom where stood a comfortable bed. Eliza laid the weary boy upon it, and laid his hands in hers till he was fast asleep. For her there was no rest. As a fire in her bones, the thought of the pursuer urged her on, and she gazed with longing eyes on the sullen, surging waters that lay between her and liberty. Here we must take our leave of her for the present, to follow the course of her pursuers. Though Mrs. Shelby had promised that the dinner should be hurried on table, yet it was soon seen, as the thing has often been seen before, that it required more than one to make a bargain. So, although the order was fairly given out in Haley's hearing, and carried to Aunt Chloe by at least half a dozen juvenile messengers, that dignitary only gave certain very gruff snorts and tosses of her head, and went on with every operation in an unusually leisurely and circumstantial manner. For some singular reason, an impression seemed to reign among the servants generally that Mrs. would not be particularly disobliged by delay, and it was wonderful what a number of counter-accidents occurred constantly to retard the course of things. One luckless wight contrived to upset the gravy, and then gravy had to be got up de novo, with due care and formality. Aunt Chloe, watching and stirring with dogged precision, answering shortly to all suggestions of haste that she warn't going to have a raw gravy on the table to help nobody's catchings. One tumbled down with the water, and had to go to the spring for more, and another precipitated the butter into the path of events, and there was from time to time giggling news brought into the kitchen that Massa Haley was mighty uneasy, and that he couldn't sit in his cheer no ways, but was a-talking and stalking to the winders and through the porch. "Saves him right," said Aunt Chloe indignantly. "He'll get was nor uneasy one of these days, if he don't mend his ways. His master'll be sending for him, and then see how he'll look." "He'll go to torment, and no mistake," said little Jake. "He deserves it," said Aunt Chloe grimly. "He's broke a many, many, many hearts, I tell you all," she said, stopping, with a fork uplifted in her hands. "It's like what Massa George reads in Revelations, souls a-calling under the altar, and a-calling on the Lord for vengeance on sich, and by and by the Lord he'll hear 'em, so he will." Aunt Chloe, who was much revered in the kitchen, was listened to with open mouth, and the dinner being now fairly sent in, the whole kitchen was at leisure to gossip with her and to listen to her remarks. "Sich'll be burnt up forever, and no mistake, won't there?" said Andy. "I'd be glad to see it, I'll be bound," said little Jake. "Chillin'," said a voice that made them all start. It was Uncle Tom, who had come in and stood listening to the conversation at the door. "Chillin'," he said. "I'm afeard you don't know what you're saying. Forever is a dreadful word, chillin'. It's awful to think on't. You oughtn't wish that hurt to any human critter." "We wouldn't to anybody but the soul drivers," said Andy. "Nobody can help wishing it to them. They so awfully wicked." "Don't nature herself kinder cry out on 'em?" said Aunt Chloe. "Don't they tear der sucking baby right off of his mother's breast and sell him and der little children as is crying and holding on by her clothes? Don't they pull 'em off and sells 'em? Don't they tear wife and husband apart," said Aunt Chloe, beginning to cry, "when it's just taken the very life on 'em? And all the while does they feel one bit, don't they drink and smoke and take it uncommon easy? Lord, if the devil don't get them, what's he good for?" And Aunt Chloe covered her face with her checkered apron and began to sob in good earnest. "Pray for them that spitefully use you, the good book says," says Tom. "Pray for 'em," said Aunt Chloe. "Lord, it's tough. I can't pray for 'em." "It's nature, Chloe, and nature's strong," said Tom. "But the Lord's grace is stronger. Besides, you ought to think what an awful state a poor critter's soul's in that'll do them ar things. You ought to thank God that you ain't like him, Chloe. I'm sure I'd rather be sold 10,000 times over than to have all that our poor critter's got to answer for." "So I'd a heap," said Jake. "Lord, shouldn't we cotch it, Andy?" Andy shrugged his shoulders and gave an acquiescent whistle. "I'm glad Massa didn't go off this morning as he looked to," said Tom. "That ar hurt me more than selling it did. Maybe it might have been natural for him, but it would have come despot hard on me, as has known him for my baby. But I've seen Massa, and I begin to feel sort of reconciled to the Lord's will now. Massa couldn't help himself. He did right, but I'm afeard things will be kind of going to rack when I'm gone. Massa can't be expected to be prying round everywhere as I've done, and keeping up all the ends. The boys all means well, but they's powerful careless. That ar troubles me." The bell here rang, and Tom was summoned to the parlor. "Tom," said his master kindly, "I want you to notice that I give this gentleman bonds to forfeit $1,000 if you are not on the spot when he wants you. He's going today to look after his other business, and you can have the day to yourself. Go anywhere you like, boy." "Thank you, massa," said Tom. "And mind yourself," said the trader, "and don't come it over your master with any of your nigger tricks, for I'll take every cent out of him if you ain't there. If he'd hear to me, he wouldn't trust any on you, slippery as eels." "Massa," said Tom, and he stood very straight, "I was just 6 years old when old missus put you into my arms, and you wasn't a year old. 'Thar,' says she, 'Tom, that's to be your young massa. Take good care of him,' says she. And now I just ask you, massa, have I ever broke word to you or gone contrary to you, especially since I was a Christian?" Mr. Shelby was fairly overcome, and the tears rose to his eyes. "My good boy," said he, "the Lord knows you say but the truth, and if I was able to help it, all the world shouldn't buy you." "And sure as I am a Christian woman," said Mrs. Shelby, "you shall be redeemed as soon as I can bring together means. Sir," she said to Haley, "take good account of who you sell him to, and let me know." "Lor, yes, for that matter," said the trader. "I may bring him up in a year, not much the worse for wear, and trade him back." "I'll trade with you then, and make it for your advantage," said Mrs. Shelby. "Of course," said the trader. "All's equal with me. Lives trade 'em up as down, so I does a good business. All I want is a living, you know, ma'am. That's all any of us wants, I suppose." Mr. and Mrs. Shelby both felt annoyed and degraded by the familiar impudence of the trader, and yet both saw the absolute necessity of putting a constraint on their feelings. The more hopelessly sordid and insensible he appeared, the greater became Mrs. Shelby's dread of his succeeding in recapturing Eliza and her child, and of course the greater her motive for detaining him by every female artifice. She therefore graciously smiled, assented, chatted familiarly, and did all she could to make time pass imperceptibly. At 2:00, Sam and Andy brought the horses up to the posts, apparently greatly refreshed and invigorated by the scamper of the morning. Sam was there, new-oiled from dinner, with an abundance of zealous and ready officiousness. As Haley approached, he was boasting in flourishing style to Andy of the evident and eminent success of the operation, now that he had fairly come to it. "Your master, I suppose, don't keep no dogs," said Haley thoughtfully as he prepared to mount. "Heaps of 'em," said Sam triumphantly. "There's Bruno, he's a roarer, and, besides that, about every nigger of us keeps a pup of some nature or other." "Poh," said Haley, and he said something else, too, with regard to the said dogs, at which Sam muttered, "I don't see no use cussin' on 'em no way." But your master don't keep no dogs. I pretty much know he don't, for tracking out niggers. Sam knew exactly what he meant, but he kept on a look of earnest and desperate simplicity. Our dogs all smells round considerable sharp. I s'pect they's the kind, though, they ain't never had no practice. They's fire dogs, though, at most anything, if you'd get 'em started. Here, Bruno, he called, whistling to the lumbering Newfoundland who came pitching tumultuously towards them. You go hang, said Haley, getting up. Come, tumble up now. Sam tumbled up accordingly, dexterously contriving to tickle Andy as he did so, which occasioned Andy to split out into a laugh, greatly to Haley's indignation, who made a cut at him with his riding-whip. "I'm 'stonished at yer, Andy," said Sam with awful gravity. "This here's serious business, Andy. You mustn't be a-making game. This here ain't no way to help Massa." "I shall take the straight road to the river," said Haley decidedly, after they had come to the boundaries of the estate. "I know the way of all of them. They make tracks for the underground." "Sartin," said Sam. "That's the idea. Massa Haley hits the thing right in the middle. Now, there's two roads to the river, the dirt road and the pike. Which Massa mean to take?" Andy looked up innocently at Sam, surprised at hearing this new geographical fact, but instantly confirmed what he said by a vehement reiteration. "'Cause," said Sam, "I'd rather be inclined to imagine that Lizzie'd take the dirt road, being it's least traveled." Haley, notwithstanding that he was a very old bird, and naturally inclined to be suspicious of chaff, was rather brought up by this view of the case. "If yer warn't both on yer such cussed liars now," he said contemplatively as he pondered a moment. The pensive, reflective tone in which this was spoken appeared to amuse Andy prodigiously, and he drew a little behind, and shook so as apparently to run a great risk of falling off his horse, while Sam's face was immovably composed into the most doleful gravity. "'Course," said Sam, "Massa can do as he'd rather. Go the straight road if Massa thinks best. It's all one to us. Now, when I study 'pon it, I think the straight road the best, deridedly." "She would naturally go a lonesome way," said Haley, thinking aloud and not minding Sam's remark. "There ain't no saying," said Sam. "Gals is peculiar. They never do nothing you thinks they will. More generally the contrary. Gals is naturally made contrary, and so if you think they's gone one road, it is sartin you'd better go t'other, and then you'll be sure to find 'em. Now, my private opinion is Lizzie took their road, so I think we'd better take the straight one." This profound generic view of the female sex did not seem to dispose Haley particularly to the straight road, and he announced decidedly that he should go the other, and asked Sam when they should come to it. "A little piece ahead," said Sam, giving a wink to Andy with the eye which was on Andy's side of the head, and he added gravely, "But I've studied on the matter, and I'm quite clar we ought not to go that dar away. I never been over it no way. It's despite lonesome, and we might lose our way. Where we'd come to, the Lord only knows." "Nevertheless," said Haley, "I shall go that way. Now that I think on it, I think I hearn 'em tell that our road was all fenced up and down by their creek. And thar, ain't it, Andy?" Andy wasn't certain. He'd only hearn tell about that road, but never been over it. In short, he was strictly noncommittal. Haley, accustomed to strike the balance of probabilities between lies of greater or lesser magnitude, thought that it lay in favor of the dirt road aforesaid. The mention of the thing he thought he perceived was involuntarily on Sam's part at first, and his confused attempts to dissuade him he set down to a desperate lying on second thoughts, as being unwilling to implicate Liza.
For those who just joined us, thank you and welcome. We are currently listening to Uncle Tom's Cabin, sorry, chapter 7. And so what's basically happening is they were the slave master misses Shelby. She wasn't too pleased at the fact that her husband sold Tom, as well as, so because she was a good Christian. So she wasn't pleased that Tom sold her husband. I mean, Shelby sold Tom as well as the young boy. So when Eliza, she was in the closet, for those who don't remember, she was in the closet eavesdropping that night when he was having a discussion with his wife, the slave master was. So she decided at the split second that she was going to run away to save her son. So she stopped by Tom's cabin and she told him that Tom was going to get sold. And Tom's wife, Chloe, was like, yo, pack your stuff, let's go. And Tom was like, no, I'm going to stay. I'm going to, I'm not going to run. But Eliza was like, yo, forget you, we out. So Eliza kept running. And by the time the morning came, they found out, which is the slave master as well as Haley, who's the slave trader, find out that Eliza took off with the boy who's no longer Shelby's quote possession. So that's kind of what's happening. And what's happening is Sam, quote Black Slam, who wants to kind of get favor in the sight of the slave masters, um, they decide that they're going to delay the process of getting on the road because anytime a slave runs away, then they use other slaves to catch those slaves. So he decides that they're going to delay the process. So they delayed the process for getting the horses together. They delayed the process. Then the slave master wife came out, was like, stay for dinner. They delayed dinner. Chloe delayed dinner. So everything is delayed, giving Eliza enough lead time to get to where it is she's going. So now they're finally on the road. Haley, the slave master, is in his feelings, and they're trying to now go and find Eliza. And so they're trying to determine, because he's not familiar with the terrain, they're trying to determine what way to go. And so that's what they're mounted their horses, and they're talking amongst themselves, and he's talking about, ninja tricks. They shouldn't be pulling any ninja tricks. And so that's actually what they're doing, is pulling quote ninja tricks, trying to delay the process. So that's where we up to. For those who just joined us, welcome. Any questions or comments, feel free. Andy, to my understanding, is another boy. So there's the quote Black Sam, and then there's Andy, which is another enslaved melanated brother, who both of them are saddling up the horses to quote help Haley, the slave trader, to go and find and recover his property, which is not Eliza, but Eliza's boy, young boy. So that's where we at right now.
When, therefore, Sam indicated the road, Haley plunged briskly into it, followed by Sam and Andy. Now, the road, in fact, was an old one that had formerly been a thoroughfare to the river, but abandoned for many years after the laying of the new pike. It was open for about an hour's ride, and after that it was cut across by various farms and fences. Sam knew this fact perfectly well. Indeed, the road had been so long closed up that Andy had never heard of it. He therefore rode along with an air of dutiful submission, only groaning and vociferating occasionally that 'twas desperate rough and bad for Jerry's foot. "Now, I just give your warning," said Haley. "I know yer won't get me to turn off this road with all your fussing, so you shut up." "Massa'll go on his way," said Sam with rueful submission, at the same time winking most portentously to Andy, whose delight was now very near the explosive point. Sam was in wonderful spirits, professed to keep a very brisk lookout, at one time exclaiming that he saw a gal's bonnet on the top of some distant eminence, or calling to Andy, "If that thar wasn't Lizzie down the hollow," always making these exclamations in some rough or craggy part of the road, where the sudden quickening of speed was a special inconvenience to all parties concerned, and thus keeping Haley in a state of constant commotion. After riding about an hour in this way, the whole party made a precipitate and tumultuous descent into a barnyard belonging to a large farming establishment. Not a soul was in sight, all the hands being employed in the fields. But as the barn stood conspicuously and plainly square across the road, it was evident that their journey in that direction had reached a decided finale. "Want that are what I tell you, master?" said Sam, with an air of injured innocence. "How does strange gentlemen expect to know more about a country than the natives born and raised?" "You rascal," said Haley, "you knew all about this." "Didn't I tell you I knowed, and you wouldn't believe me? I telled master 'twas all shut up and fenced up, and I didn't expect we could get through. Andy heard me." It was all too true to be disputed, and the unlucky man had to pocket his wrath with the best grace he was able, and all three faced to the right about, and took up their line of march for the highway. In consequence of all the various delays, it was about 3/4 of an hour after Eliza had laid her child to sleep in the village tavern that the party came riding into the same place. Eliza was standing by the window looking out in another direction when Sam's quick eye caught a glimpse of her. Haley and Andy were 2 yards behind. At this crisis, Sam contrived to have his hat blown off and uttered a loud and characteristic ejaculation which startled her at once. She drew suddenly back, the whole train swept by the window, round to the front door. 1,000 lives seemed to be concentrated in that one moment to Eliza. Her room opened by a side door to the river. She caught her child, sprang down the steps towards it. The trader caught a full glimpse of her just as she was disappearing down the bank, and throwing himself from his horse and calling loudly on Sam and Andy, he was after her like a hound after a deer. In that dizzy moment, her feet to her scarce seemed to touch the ground, and a moment brought her to the water's edge. Right on behind they came, and nerved with strength such as God gives only to the desperate, with one wild cry and flying leap she vaulted sheer over the turbid current by the shore, on to the raft of ice beyond. It was a desperate leap, impossible to anything but madness and despair, and Haley, Sam, and Andy instinctively cried out and lifted up their hands as she did it. The huge green fragment of ice on which she alighted pitched and creaked as her weight came on it, but she stayed there not a moment. With wild cries and desperate energy she leapt to another and still another cake, stumbling, leaping, slipping, springing upwards again. Her shoes are gone, her stockings cut from her feet, while blood marked every step. But she saw nothing, felt nothing, till dimly, as in a dream, she saw the Ohio side, and a man helping her up the bank. "You're a brave gal now, whoever you are," said the man with an oath. Eliza recognized the voice and face for a man who owned a farm not far from her old home. "Oh, Mr. Symes, save me, do hide me," said Eliza. "Why, what's this?" said the man. "Why, if 'tain't Shelby's gal." "My child, this boy, he'd sold him. There is his massa," said she, pointing to the Kentucky shore. "Oh, Mr. Symes, you've got a little boy." "So I have," said the man, as he roughly but kindly drew her up the steep bank. "Besides, you're a right brave gal. I like grit wherever I see it." When they had gained the top of the bank, the man paused. "I'd be glad to do something for you," said he, "but then there's nowhere I could take you. The best I can do is to tell you to go thar," said he, pointing to a large white house which stood by itself, off the main street of the village. "Go thar. They're kind folks. There's no kind of danger but they'll help you. They're up to all of that sort of thing." "The Lord bless you," said Eliza earnestly. No occasion in the world," said the man. "What I've done's of no account." "Oh, surely, sir, you won't tell anyone?" "Go to thunder, gal. What do you take a feller for?" "In course not," said the man. "Come now, go along like a likely, sensible gal as you are. You've earned your liberty, and you shall have it for all me." The woman folded her child to her bosom and walked firmly and swiftly away. The man stood and looked after her. "Shelby, now, maybe won't think this yard the most neighborly thing in the world, but what's a feller to do? If he catches one of my gals in the same fix, he's welcome to pay back. Somehow I never could see no kind of critter as striving and panting and trying to clear themselves with the dogs after 'em and go agin 'em. Besides, I don't see no kind of occasion for me to be hunter and catcher for other folks either." So spoke this poor, heathenish Kentuckian, who had not been instructed in his constitutional relations, and consequently was betrayed into acting in a sort of Christianized manner, which, if he had been better situated and more enlightened, he would not have been left to do. Haley had stood a perfectly amazed spectator of the scene till Eliza had disappeared up the bank, when he turned a blank, inquiring look on Sam and Andy. "That ar was a tolerable fair stroke of business," said Sam. "The gal's got 7 devils in her, I believe," said Haley. "How like a wildcat she jumped." "Why now," said Sam, scratching his head, "I hope Mass'll 'scuse us trying down our road. Don't think I feel spry enough for dat ar, no way." And Sam gave a hoarse chuckle. "You laugh," said the trader with a growl. "Lord bless you, Massa, I couldn't help it now," said Sam, giving way to the long pent-up delight of his soul. "She looks so curious, a-leaping and springing, ice a-cracking, only to hear her plump, her ker chunk, ker splash, spring. Lord, how she goes it!" And Sam and Andy laughed till the tears rolled down their cheeks. "I'll make you laugh to the side of your mouths," said the trader, laying about their heads with his riding whip. Both ducked and ran shouting up the bank, and were on their horses before he was up. "Good evening, Massa," said Sam with much gravity. "I very much expect Missus be anxious about Jerry. Massa Haley won't want us no longer. Missus wouldn't hear of our riding the critters over Lizzie's bridge tonight." And with a facetious poke into Andy's ribs, he started off, followed by the latter, at full speed, their shouts of laughter coming faintly on the wind. End of Chapter 7. Chapter 8.
So chapter 7 was wild. For those who just joined us, welcome. We're listening to Uncle Tom's Cabin, Chapter 7. Chapter 7 was crazy. So, for those who just joined us, Eliza, she ran off. They tried to delay him as much as possible. They finally get to the village. The slave trader sees her at the corner of her eye. She takes up her young one. She goes on the move. The river is frozen. That's why they couldn't get across. And, it's broken up a bit. And she's like dashing over the icebergs and touching from one to the next, to the next, to the next, till she gets to the other side. And it's in the sight of Sam and the slave trader, Haley. You know what I mean? And he's looking like she got seven devils in her. I mean, she is on the move. She wants the survival of her child. This is how much she wants for her child to survive. Remember, her husband, George, ran off already, and he says he's going to Canada. So she's basically on her own, and she's looking at whether or not she's going to sit there and allow. She already had two children who died in the story. She had two children who died, and this is the only surviving child. So she says, you know what? It's all or nothing. And so it talks about the desperation. One thing we have to look at and consider when we're talking about the history of those who came before us, that in many cases there was a level of desperation, like in Henry Botts Brown, where he was so desperate for freedom that they he agreed to be folded up in a box, a literal box, and mailed to Philadelphia, if I'm not mistaken, so that he can be free. So this level of desperation of breaking out of this oppressive regime, this servitude, this tyrannical institution of slavery was real and present for many people, and many people were willing to risk life and limb to be free, and it's something that many take for granted in this day and time. But just listening to what people were willing to do, it kind of puts everything in perspective. Welcome to those who just joined us. So now that's what's happening right now. Haley needs to go away. Yeah, Sam is a mess. Sam is a mess. Sam over there playing, you know what I mean? He have sense, but he playing like he don't have no sense. But so that's what's going on now. Haley is in his feelings because he's like he collected the debt and now he can't recoup his monies. Because why? It's like somebody who buys debt today. Like they buy credit card debt. They buy it for pennies on the dollar. And how they make their money is when they come to you knowing that the debt was already sold. And once you start having a conversation with the people who are not the original debtors, you now become in debt to the new company. So that's why they tell you, well, I mean, that's the credit card stuff, but they tell you, don't go into negotiations with them because they're not the one. They can't produce a receipt. They can't produce a signature. But once you start to go into discussions with them and agree with them, now that's where they got you, you know? So anyway, let's nothing much has changed here. So we're gonna go into chapter 8. Let's go to chapter 8, y'all.
8. Eliza's Escape. Eliza made her desperate retreat across the river just in the dusk of twilight. The gray mist of evening, rising slowly from the river, enveloped her as she disappeared up the bank, and the swollen current and floundering masses of ice presented a hopeless barrier between her and her pursuer. Haley therefore slowly and discontentedly returned to the little tavern to ponder further what was to be done. The woman opened to him the door of a little parlor covered with a rag carpet, where stood a table with a very shining black oilcloth, sundry lank, high-backed wood chairs, with some plaster images in resplendent colors on the mantel-shelf, above a very dimly smoking grate. A long hardwood settle extended its uneasy length by the chimney, and here Haley sat him down to meditate on the instability of human hopes and happiness in general. "What did I want with a little cuss now?" he said to himself, "that I should have got myself treated like a coon as I am this here way?" And Haley relieved himself by repeating over a not very select litany of imprecations on himself, which, though there was the best possible reason to consider them as true, we shall, as a matter of taste, omit. He was startled by the loud and dissonant voice of a man who was apparently dismounting at the door. He hurried to the window. "By the land, if this here ain't the nearest now to what I've heard folks call Providence," said Haley. "I do believe that there's Tom Locker." Haley hastened out. Standing by the bar in the corner of the room was a brawny, muscular man, full 6 feet in height and broad in proportion. He was dressed in a coat of buffalo skin, made with the hair outward, which gave him a shaggy and fierce appearance. perfectly in keeping with the whole air of his physiognomy. In the head and face, every organ and lineament expressive of brutal and unhesitating violence was in a state of the highest possible development. Indeed, could our readers fancy a bulldog come onto a man's estate and walking about in a hat and coat, they would have no unapt idea of the general style and effect of his physique. He was accompanied by a traveling companion, in many respects an exact contrast to himself. He was short and slender, lithe and cat-like in his motions, and had a peering, mousing expression about his keen black eyes, with which every feature of his face seemed sharpened into sympathy. His thin, long nose ran out as if it was eager to bore into the nature of things in general. His sleek, thin, black hair was stuck eagerly forward, and all his motions and evolutions expressed a dry, cautious acuteness. The great man poured out a big tumbler half full of raw spirits and gulped it down without a word. The little man stood tiptoe, and putting his head first to one side and then the other, and snuffing considerably in the direction of the various bottles, ordered at last a mint julep in a thin and quivering voice, and with an air of great circumspection. When poured out, he took it and looked at it with a sharp, complacent air, like a man who thinks he has done about the right thing, and hit the nail on the head, and proceeded to dispose of it in short and well-advised sips.
"Well, now, who'd have thought this yar luck had come to me? Why, Lucker, how are you?"
said Haley, coming forward and extending his hand to the big man. "The devil," was the civil reply. "What brought you here, Haley?" The mousing man, who bore the name of Marks, instantly stopped his sipping, and, poking his head forward, looked shrewdly on the new acquaintance, as a cat sometimes looks at a moving dry leaf or some other possible object of pursuit.
"I say, Tom, this is the luckiest thing in the world. I'm in a devil of a hobble, and you must help me out." Like enough,"
grunted his complacent acquaintance.
"A body may be pretty sure of that when you're glad to see him. Something to be made off of him. What's the blow now?" "You've got a friend here?" said Haley, looking doubtfully at Marks. "Partner, perhaps?" "Yes, I have. Here, Marks, here's that our fellow that I was in with Natchez."
"Shall be pleased with his acquaintance,"
said Marks, thrusting out a long, thin hand like a raven's claw.
"Mr. Haley, I believe?"
"The same, sir," said Haley. "And now, gentlemen, seeing as we've met so happily, I think I'll stand up to a small matter of a treat in this here parlor. So now, old coon," said he to the man at the bar, "get us hot water and sugar and cigars and plenty of the real stuff, and we'll have a blowout."
Behold, then, the candles lighted, the fire stimulated to the burning point in the grate, and our three worthies seated round a table, well spread with all the accessories to good fellowship enumerated before. Haley began a pathetic recital of his peculiar troubles. Locker shut up his mouth and listened to him with gruff and surly attention. Marks, who was anxiously and with much fidgeting compounding a tumbler of punch to his own peculiar taste, occasionally looked up from his employment, and, poking his sharp nose and chin almost into Haley's face, gave the most earnest heed to the whole narrative. The conclusion of it appeared to amuse him extremely, for he shook his shoulders and sides in silence, and perked up his thin lips with an air of great internal enjoyment.
"So then, you're fairly sewed up, ain't you?" he said. "It's neatly done, too."
"This yar young'un business makes lots of troubles in the trade," said Haley dolefully.
"If we could get a breed of gals that didn't care now for their young'uns," said Marks, "I tell you, I think it would be about the greatest modern improvement I knows on."
And Marks patronized his joke by a quiet introductory sniggle.
"Just so," said Haley. "I never couldn't see into it. The young'uns is heaps of trouble to 'em. One would think now they'd be glad to get clear on them, but they aren't. And the more trouble a young'un is, and the more good-for-nothing as gentle thing, the tighter they sticks to 'em."
"Well, Mr. Haley," said Marks, "let's pass the hot water. Yes, sir, you say as what I feel that I'll have. Now, I bought a gal once when I was in the trade. A tight, likely wench she was, too, and quite considerable but smart. And she had a young'un that was miserable sickly. It had a crooked back, or something or other, and I just gived away to a man that thought he'd take his chance raising on't, being it didn't cost nothing. Never thought, the gal's taken on about it, but, lor', you ought to see how she went on. Why, really, she did seem to me to value the child more 'cause 'twas sickly and cross and plagued her, and she weren't making believe, neither. Cried about it, she did, and loped around, as if she'd lost every friend she had. It really was droll to think on. Lord, there ain't no end to women's notions.
Well, just so with me, said Haley. Last summer, down on Red River, I got a gal traded off on me with a likely-looking child enough, and his eyes looked as bright as yourn, but come to look, I found him stone blind. Fact, he was stone blind. Well, you see, I thought there weren't no harm in my just passing him along and not saying nothing, and I'd got him nicely swapped off for a keg of whiskey, but come to get him away from the gal, she was just like a tiger. So 'twas before we started, and I hadn't got my gang chained up, so what should she do but ups on a cotton bale like a cat, catches a knife from one of the deckhands, and I tell you, she made all fly for a minute till she saw 'twas no use, and she just turns round and pitches head first, young'un and all, into the river. Went down plump, never rise.
Bah, said Tom Locker, who had listened to these stories with ill-repressed disgust.
Shiftless, both on you. My gals don't cut on no such shines, I tell you.
Indeed, how do you help it? Said Marks briskly.
Help it? Why, I buys a gal, and if she's got a young'un to be sold, I just walks up and puts my fist to her face and says, look here now, if you give me one word out of your head, I'll smash your face in. I won't hear one word, not the beginning of a word, I says to him. This here young'un's mine, and not yourn, and you've no kind of business with it. I'm going to sell it first chance. Mind you don't cut up none of your shines about it, or I'll make you wish you'd never been born. I tell you, they sees it ain't no play when I gets hold. I makes 'em as white as fishes, and if one on 'em begins and gives a yelp, why—" And Mr. Locker brought down his fist with a thump that fully explained the hiatus. "That ar's what you may call emphasis," said Marks, poking Haley in the side and going into another small giggle. "Ain't Tom peculiar? I say, Tom, I expect you make 'em understand, for all niggers' heads is woolly. They don't never have no doubt o' your meaning, Tom. If you ain't the devil, Tom, you's his twin brother, I'll say that for you."
Tom received the compliment with becoming modesty, and began to look as affable as was consistent, as John Bunyan says, with his doggish nature. Haley, who had been imbibing very freely of the staple of the evening, began to feel a sensible elevation and enlargement of his moral faculties, a phenomenon not unusual with gentlemen of the serious and reflective turn under similar circumstances.
"Well, now, Tom," he said, "you really is too bad, as I always have told you. You know, Tom, you and I used to talk over these yar matters down Natchez, and I used to prove to you that we made full as much and was as well off for this yar world by treating on 'em well, besides keeping a better chance for coming in the kingdom at last, when worst comes to worst, and there ain't nothing else left to get, you know."
"Bah," said Tom, "don't I know? Don't make me too sick with any of your stuff. My stomach is a little riled now," and Tom drank half a glass of raw brandy.
"I say,"
said Haley, and leaning back in his chair and gesturing impressively,
"I'll say this now. I always meant to drive my trade so as to make money on't first and foremost, as much as any man. But then, trade ain't everything, and money ain't everything, 'cause we's all got souls. I don't care now who hears me say it, and I think a cussed sight on it, so I may as well come out with it. I believe in religion, and one of these days, when I got matters tight and snug, I calculates to tend to my soul in them ar matters. And so, what's the use of doing any more wickedness than's really necessary? Don't seem to me it's all prudent."
"Tend to your soul," repeated Tom contemptuously. "Take a bright lookout to find a soul in you. Save yourself any care on that score. If the devil sifts you through a hair sieve, he won't find one."
"Why, Tom, you're cross," said Haley. "Why can't you take it pleasant now, when a feller's talking for your good?"
"Stop that ar jaw of yourn there," said Tom gruffly. "I can stand most any talk of yourn but your pious talk. That kills me right up. After all, what's the odds between me and you? T'an't that you care one bit more or have a bit more feeling, it's clean, sheer dog meanness, wanting to cheat the devil and save your own skin. Don't I see through it? And your getting religion, as you call it, after all, is too pison mean for any creatur. Run up a bill with the devil all your life, and then sneak out when pay time comes,
Bob.
Come, gentlemen, I say, this isn't business, said Marks. There's
All right, for those who just joined us, welcome. It's getting a little heavy. Let me know, we stop a little bit along the way because, as Sister Global Purpose says, it does allow things to bubble up to the surface. So that's why we're doing it in a community setting. If it gets to that point, I'll stop it a little bit so that we could process some of what we're hearing. Because this is part of the conversations that oftentimes melanated people did not hear. This is, even though it's written by a European, this is the thought processes that they're having amongst themselves. And so, even in this conversation where Tom is trying to bring conscience, he's being disparaged by Haley and others to not have a conscience because you've been, like you said, you've been playing with the devil all your life. Now, all of a sudden, you want to act like you don't know what time it is, basically. So they're having this, better than me pissing contest, after they just compared notes about, how brutal and cruel they could be towards the people that they're exploiting or towards their business of, quote, the trade. So if you take out, and that's how sometimes they would reference, they wouldn't necessarily say slave trade, they would say the trade. So, it's like somebody who's doing something nefarious and you don't want to be reminded constantly that you're doing something nefarious. So it's kind of like I say always, we don't want to know that we're doing something wrong. We have to kind of make it right. So some of the ways that they will make it right is that these poor creatures couldn't get on without us, and they couldn't, they need us because they're illiterate and they're this and they're that. Speaking of melanated people, they would say these things so that they could feel better about what they were doing, right? Because even if the conscience is in there in the back corner, under the basket, it's there somewhere. And I mean, Jason said, "Hey, what's up, Jason?" He said after he makes his money, he will get his relationship right with them. Well, yeah, that's what he said. After he already get that dough. Mm-hmm. These fictional and non-fictional accounts out. Yeah, I mean, it's part of the healing process. It did me like that for a couple of years, but now I could kind of listen to it. But I acknowledge what others may be, and no problem if I have to stop and we discuss it because it does bring up feelings of, wow, this is how you spoke. This is a fictional account, but it's based on non-fictional accounts. And some of the non-fictional account is not even taking time to like set the stage. It just jumps into the stuff that makes you like, what? You know what I mean? So definitely. Um, yeah, Eliza there, that's why she ran, because she knew what time it is. She knew what time it was. So we are in chapter 8. We're like halfway through chapter 8. So I'm going to press continue. Feel free to continue to discuss.
different ways, of looking at all subjects. Mr. Haley is a very nice man, no doubt, and has his own conscience. And Tom, you have your ways, and very good ones too, Tom. But quarreling, won't answer no kind of purpose. Let's go to business. Now, Mr. Haley, what is it? You want us to undertake to catch this yar gal?
The gal's no matter mine. She's Shelby's. It's only the boy. I was a fool for buying the monkey.
You're generally a fool, said Tom gruffly. Come now, Locker, none of your huffs, said Marks, licking his lips. You see, Mr. Haley's putting us in the way of a good job, I reckon. Just hold still. These here arrangements is my forte. This here gal, Mr. Haley, how is she? What is she?
Well, white and handsome, well brought up. I gin Shelby 800 or 1,000 and then made well on her.
White and handsome, well brought up, said Marks, his sharp eyes, nose, and mouth all alive with enterprise. Look here now, Locker, a beautiful opening. We'll do a business here on our own account. We does the catchin', the boy, of course, goes to Mr. Haley. We takes the gal to Orleans to speculate on. Ain't it beautiful? Tom, whose great heavy mouth had stood ajar during this communication, now suddenly snapped it together as a big dog closes on a piece of meat, and seemed to be digesting the idea at his leisure. You see, said Marks to Haley, stirring his punch as he did so, you see, we has justices convenient at all pants alongshore. That does up any little jobs in our line quite reasonable. Tom, he does the knocking down and that and I come in all dressed up, shining boots, everything first chop when the swearing's to be done. You ought to see now, said Marks, in a glow of professional pride, how I can tone it off. One day I'm Mr. Twickham from New Orleans. Another day I'm just come from my plantation on Pearl River, where I work 700 niggers. Then again, I come out a distant relation of Henry Clay or some old cock in Kentuck. Talents is different, you know. Now, Tom's roarer when there's any thumping or fighting to be done, but at lying he ain't good, Tom ain't. You see, it don't come natural to him. But, Lord, if there's a feller in the country that can swear to anything and everything and put in all the circumstances and flourishes with a long face and carry through better than I can, why, I'd like to see him, that's all. I believe in my heart I could get along and snake through even if justices were more particular than they is. Sometimes I rather wish they was more particular. 'Twould be a heap more relishin' if they was. More fun, you know.
Tom Locker, who, as we have made it appear, was a man of slow thoughts and movements, here interrupted Marks by bringing his heavy fist down on the table so as to make it all ring again.
"It'll do," he said.
Lord bless you, Tom. You needn't break all the glasses, said Marks. Save your fist for the time of need.
"But, gentlemen, ain't I to come in for a share of the profits?" said Haley.
Ain't it enough we catch the boy for you? Said Locker.
"What do you want?" "Well," said Haley, "if I gives you the job, it's worth something, say 10% on the profits, expenses paid."
Now, said Locker with a tremendous oath and striking the table with his heavy fist, don't I know you, Dan Haley? Don't you think to come it over me. Suppose Marks and I have taken up the catching trade just to accommodate gentlemen like you and get nothing for ourselves. Not by a long chalk. We'll have the gal out and out, and you keep quiet or you see we'll have both. What's to hinder? Hadn't you showed us the game? It's as free to us as you, I hope. If you or Shelby wants to catch us, look where the partridges was last year. If you find them or us, you're quite welcome.
"Oh, well, certainly, just let it go at that," said Haley, alarmed. "You catch the boy for the job. Y'allers did trade fire with me, Tom, and was up to your word."
You know that, said Tom. I don't pretend none of your sniveling ways, but I won't lie in my accounts with the devil himself. What I says I'll do, I will do. You know that, Dan Haley.
Just so. I said so, Tom," said Haley. "And if you'd only promise to have the boy for me in a week at any point you'll name, that's all I want."
But it ain't all I want, by a long jump, said Tom. You don't think I did business with you down Natchez for nothing, Haley. I've learned to hold an eel when I catch him. You've got to fork over $50 flat down, or this child don't start a peg. I know you're.
"Why, when you have a job in hand that may bring a clean profit of somewhere about 1,000 or 1,600, why, Tom, you're unreasonable," said Haley.
Yes, and hasn't we business booked for 5 weeks to come, all we can do? And suppose we leaves all and goes to bushwhacking round out of your young'uns and finally doesn't catch the gal, and gal's allers is the devil to catch. What's then? Would you pay us a cent, would you? I think I see you doing it, Hug. No, flap down your 50. If we get the job and it pays, I'll hand it back. If we don't, it's for our trouble. That's fair, ain't it, Marks? Certainly, said Marks with a conciliatory tone. It's only a retaining fee, you see. We lawyers, you know. Well, we must all keep good-natured. Keep easy, you know. Tom'll have the boy for you, anywhere you'll name. Won't you, Tom? If I find the young'un, I'll bring him on to Cincinnati and leave him at Granny Belcher's on the landing, said Locker. Marks had got from his pocket a greasy pocketbook, and taking a long paper from thence, he sat down, and fixing his keen black eyes on it, began mumbling over its contents. Barnes, Shelby County, boy, Jim, $300 for him, dead or alive. Edwards, Dick and Lucy, man and wife, $600. Wench Polly and 2 children, $600 for her or her head. I'm just running over our business to see if we can take up this yar handily. Locker, he said after a pause, we must set Adams and Springer on the track of these yar. They've been booked some time. They'll charge too much, said Tom. I'll manage that ar. They's young in the business and must spect to work cheap, said Marks as he continued to read. There's 3 on 'em easy cases, 'cause all you got to do is to shoot 'em or swear they shot. They couldn't, of course, charge much for that. Them other cases, he said, folding the paper, will bear putting off a spell. So now let's come to the particulars. Now, Mr. Haley, you saw this yar gal when she landed?
To be sure, plain as I see you.
And a man helping on her up the bank, said Locker.
To be sure I did.
Most likely, said Marks. She's took in somewhere. But where's a question? Tom, what do you say? We must cross the river tonight, no mistake, said Tom. But there's no boat about, said Marks. The ice is running awfully, Tom. Ain't it dangerous? Don't know nothing about that, only it's got to be done, said Tom decidedly. Dear me, said Marks, fidgeting. It'll be, I say, he said, walking to the window. It's dark as a wolf's mouth, and Tom...
The long and short is you're scared, Marks.
But I can't help that. You've got to go. Suppose you want to lie by a day or two till the gal's been carried on the underground line up to Sandusky or so before you start. Oh, no, I ain't a grain afraid, said Marks. Only
what?
Said Tom. Well, about the boat. You see, there ain't any boat. I heard the woman say there was one coming along this evening, and that a man was going to cross over in it. Neck or nothing, we must go with him, said Tom.
I suppose you got good dogs,
said Haley. First rate, said Marks. But what's the use? You ain't got nothing of hers to smell on.
Yes, I have, said Haley triumphantly. Here's her shawl she left on the bed in a hurry. She left her bonnet, too.
That are's lucky, said Locker. Fork over.
Though the dogs might damage the gal if they come on her unwires, said Haley.
That are's a consideration, said Marks. Our dogs tore a feller half to pieces once down in Mobile before we could get him off.
Well, you see, for this sort that's to be sold for their looks, that I won't answer, you see, said Haley.
I do see, said Marks. Besides, if she's got took in, 'tain't no go neither. Dogs is no account in these up states where these critters get carried. Of course, you can't get on their track. They only does down in plantations where niggers, when they runs, has to do their own running and don't get no help.
For those who just joined us, we are listening to Okatob's Comet Chapter 8. This chapter is a bit lengthy, and there's just so much in it. As we can see right now, he's negotiating. The slave trader is negotiating with slave catchers. He was lamenting that she got away, and just so happened that these slave catchers, who he knew from a time before, came into wherever he was drinking, whatever he was doing, and now he's putting a deposit down. Because they're like, we're not going to go look for her without a deposit. And they're putting a deposit down. He's putting a deposit down, a retainer, for their trouble while they go off and look for her. But really, he's only paying for the young boy to be returned. And so their thought is that they're going to steal her and either sell her back into slavery because she can pass for white, and many quote pretty gals or yellow gals or mulatto women would be prostituted, especially in New Orleans area. So yes, definitely this is kind of what's going on, and this is something that is really based in reality. So take a breath. Yeah. Yep. So that's all that's that. I'm gonna press play here. I'm just seeing if I missed anything. All right.
Well, said Locker, who had just stepped out to the bar to make some inquiries, they say the man's come with the boat. So, Marks? That worthy cast a rueful look at the comfortable quarters he was leaving, but slowly rose to obey. After exchanging a few words of further arrangement, Haley, with visible reluctance, handed over the $50 to Tom, and the worthy trio separated for the night. If any of our refined and Christian readers object to the society into which this scene introduces them, let us beg them to begin and conquer their prejudices in time. The catching business, we beg to remind them, is rising to the dignity of a lawful and patriotic profession. If all the broad land between Mississippi and the Pacific becomes one great market for bodies and souls, and human property retains the locomotive tendencies of this 19th century, the trader and catcher may yet be among our aristocracy. While this scene was going on at the tavern, Sam and Andy, in a state of high felicitation, pursued their way home. Sam was in the highest possible feather, and expressed his exultation by all sorts of supernatural howls and ejaculations, by divers odd motions and contortions of his whole system. Sometimes he would sit backward, with his face to the horse's tail and sides, and then, with a whoop and a somerset, come right side up in his place again,
and, drawing on a grave face, begin to lecture Andy in high-sounding tones for laughing and playing the fool. Anon, slapping his sides with his arms, he would burst forth in peals of laughter that made the old woods ring as they passed. With all these evolutions, he contrived to keep the horses up to the top of their speed until, between 10 and 11, their heels resounded on the gravel at the end of the balcony. Mrs. Shelby flew to the railings.
"Is that you, Sam? Where are they?"
"Master Haley's resting at the tavern. He's dreadful fatigued, missus."
"And Eliza, Sam?"
"Well, she's clear across Jordan, as a body may say, in the land of Canaan."
"Why, Sam, what do you mean?"
said Mrs. Shelby, breathless and almost faint, as the possible meaning of these words came over her.
"Well, missus, the Lord, he preserves his own. Lizzie's done gone over the river into Ohio, as markably as if the Lord took her over in a chariot of fire and 2 hosses."
Sam's vein of piety was always uncommonly fervent in his mistress's presence, and he made great capital of scriptural figures and images.
"Come up here, Sam,"
said Mr. Shelby, who had followed on to the veranda, "and tell your mistress what she wants. Come, Emily," said he, passing his arm round her. "You were cold and all in a shiver. You allow yourself to feel too much."
"Feel too much? Am I not a woman? A mother? Are we not both responsible to God for this poor girl? My God, lay not this sin to our charge."
"What sin, Emily? You see yourself that we have only done what we were obliged to."
"There's an awful feeling of guilt about it, though," said Mrs. Shelby. "I can't reason it away."
"Here, Andy, you nigger, be alive," called Sam under the veranda. "Take these yar horses to der barn. Don't you hear Massa calling?"
And Sam soon appeared, palm leaf in hand, at the parlor door.
"Now, Sam, tell us distinctly how the matter was," said Mr. Shelby. "Where is Eliza, if you know?"
"Well, Massa, I saw her with my own eyes a-crossing on the floating ice. She crossed most remarkably. It wasn't no less nor a miracle, and I saw a man help her up on the Ohio side, and then she was lost in the dusk."
"Sam, I think this rather apocryphal, this miracle. Crossing on floating ice isn't so easily done," said Mr. Shelby.
"Easy? Couldn't nobody done it without the Lord. Why, now," said Sam, "'twas just this your way. Massa Haley and me and Andy, we comes up to the little tavern by the river, and I rides a leetle ahead. I was so zealous to be cotchin' Lizzie that I couldn't hold in no way. And when I comes by the tavern winder, sure enough, there she was, right in plain sight, and they digging on behind, while I loses off my head and I sings out enough to raise the dead. Course, Lizzie, she hires, and she dodges back when Mass Haley, he gone past the door, and then, I tell you, she cleared out the side door. She went down to the river bank. Mass Haley, he seed her and yelled out, and him and me and Andy, we took arter. Down she come to the river, and thar was the current running 10 feet wide by the shore, and over t'other side a ice a-sawing and a-jiggling up and down, kinder as 'twere a great island. We come right behind her, and I thought my soul he'd got her sure enough, when she gin sich a screech as I never hearn, and there she was, clar on to the other side of the current, on the ice, and then on she went, a-screeching and a-jumping. The ice went crack, swallop, crackin', chunk, and she a-bounding like a buck. Lord, the spring that our gal's got in there ain't common, I'm opinion."
Mrs. Shelby sat perfectly still, pale with excitement, while Sam told his story.
"God be praised, she isn't dead," she said. "But where is the poor child now?"
"The Lord will provide," said Sam, rolling up his eyes piously. "As I've been a-saying, this here is a providence and no mistake, as Missus has allers been instructing on us. There's allers instruments rise up to the Lord's will. Now, if 'tadn't been for me today, she'd have been took a dozen times. Warn't it I started off the horses this here morning and kept 'em chasing till nigh dinner time? And didn't I car Massa Haley night 5 miles out at the road this evening, or else he'd have come up a Lizzie as easy as a dog out a coon. These yar's all providences."
"They are a kind of providences that you'll have to be pretty sparing of, Master Sam. I allow no such practices with gentlemen on my place," said Mr. Shelby, with as much sternness as he could command under the circumstances. "Now, there is no more use in making believe be angry with a Negro than with a child. Both instinctively see the true state of the case, through all attempts to effect the contrary, and Sam was in no wise disheartened by this rebuke. though he assumed an air of doleful gravity, and stood with the corners of his mouth lowered in most penitential style.
Massa's quite right, quite. It was ugly on me. There's no disputing that and of course Massa and Missus wouldn't encourage no such works. I'm sensible of that but a poor nigger like me's mazin' tempted to act ugly sometimes when fellers will cut up such shines as that Massa Haley. He ain't no gentleman no way. Anybody's been raised as I've been can't help seeing that
Well, Sam, said Mrs. Shelby, as you appear to have a proper sense of your errors, you may go now and tell Aunt Chloe she may get you some of that cold ham that was left of dinner today.
I can't with Sam right now, y'all. I'm sorry. We almost at the end of chapter 3. Sam is doing the most. Once they told him that Tom might be sold off, Sam is jockeying for position. Did you hear how Sam came back and told the story? He is doing the absolute most. I'm sorry, I couldn't hold that anymore. Let me just continue to play this.
and Andy must be hungry.
Missus is a heap too good for us, said Sam, making his bow with alacrity and departing.
It will be perceived, as has been before intimated, that Master Sam had a native talent that might undoubtedly have raised him to eminence in political life, a talent of making capital out of everything that turned up, to be invested for his own especial praise and glory, and having done up his piety and humility as he trusted to the satisfaction of the parlor, he clapped his palm leaf on his head with a sort of rakish, free and easy air, and proceeded to the dominions of Aunt Chloe with the intention of flourishing largely in the kitchen.
I'll speechify these yar niggers, said Sam to himself. Now I've got a chance. Lord, I'll reel it off to make 'em stare.
It must be observed that one of Sam's especial delights had been to ride in attendance on his master to all kinds of political gatherings, where, roosted on some rail fence, or perched aloft in some tree, he would sit watching the orators with the greatest apparent gusto, and then, descending among the various brethren of his own color, assembled on the same errand, he would edify and delight them with the most ludicrous burlesques and imitations, all delivered with the most imperturbable earnestness and solemnity. And though the auditors immediately about him were generally of his own color, it not infrequently happened that they were fringed pretty deeply with those of a fair complexion, who listened, laughing and winking, to Sam's great self-congratulation. In fact, Sam considered oratory as his vocation, and never let slip an opportunity of magnifying his office. Now, between Sam and Aunt Chloe there had existed, from ancient times, a sort of chronic feud, or rather a decided coolness. But, as Sam was meditating something in the provision department as the necessary and obvious foundation of his operations, he determined, on the present occasion, to be eminently conciliatory, for he well knew that although Mrs. Orders would undoubtedly be followed to the letter, yet he should gain a considerable deal by enlisting the spirit also. He therefore appeared before Aunt Chloe with a touchingly subdued, resigned expression, like one who has suffered immeasurable hardships in behalf of a persecuted fellow creature. Enlarged upon the fact that Mrs. had directed him to come to Aunt Chloe for whatever might be wanting to make up the balance in his solids and fluids, and thus unequivocally acknowledged her right and supremacy in the cooking department, and all thereto pertaining. The thing took accordingly. No poor, simple, virtuous body was ever cajoled by the attentions of an electioneering politician with more ease than Aunt Chloe was won over by Master Sam's suavities, and if he had been the prodigal son himself, he could not have been overwhelmed with more maternal bountifulness, and he soon found himself seated, happy and glorious, over a large tin pan containing a sort of olla podrida of all that had appeared on the table for 2 or 3 days past. Savory morsels of ham, golden blocks of corn cake, fragments of pie of every conceivable mathematical figure, chicken wings, gizzards, and drumsticks all appeared in picturesque confusion, and Sam, as monarch of all he surveyed, sat with his palm leaf cocked rejoicingly to one side and patronizing Andy at his right hand. The kitchen was full of all his compeers, who had hurried and crowded in from the various cabins to hear the termination of the day's exploits. Now was Sam's hour of glory. The story of the day was rehearsed with all kinds of ornament and varnishing which might be necessary to heighten its effect. For Sam, like some of our fashionable dilettanti, never allowed a story to lose any of its gilding by passing through his hands. Roars of laughter attended the narration, and were taken up and prolonged by all the smaller fry, who were lying in any quantity about on the floor, or perched in every corner. In the height of the uproar and laughter, Sam, however, preserved an immovable gravity, only from time to time rolling his eyes up and giving his auditors divers inexpressibly droll glances, without departing from the sententious elevation of his oratory. "You see, fellow countrymen," said Sam, elevating a turkey's leg with energy, "you see now what this 'ere child up ter, for fending yer all, yes, all on yer. For him as tries to get one of our people is as good as trying to get all. You see, the principle is same. That are is clar. And any one of these 'ere drivers that comes smelling round arter any of our people, why, he's got me in his way. I'm the feller he's got to set in with. I'm the feller for you all to come to, Bredden. I'll stand up for your rights. I'll fend 'em to the last breath." "Why, but Sam, you telled me only this morning that you'd help this 'ere massa to cotch Lizzie. Seems to me your talk don't hang together," said Andy. "I tell you now, Andy," said Sam with awful superiority, "don't yer be talking about what yer don't know nothin' on. Boys like you, Andy, means well, but they can't be 'spected to hallucinate the great principles of action." Andy looked rebuked, particularly by the hard word hallucinate, which most of the youngerly members of the company seemed to consider as a settler in the case, while Sam proceeded. "Dat ar was conscience, Andy. When I thought of gwine arter Lizzie, I raly suspected Masser was sot that way. When I found Missus was sot the contrar, dat ar was conscience more yet. 'Cause fellers always gets more by sticking to Missus' side. So you see, I's persistent either way, and sticks up to conscience and holds on to principles. Yes, principles," said Sam, giving an enthusiastic toss of a chicken's neck. "What's principles good for if we isn't persistent, I want to know. Thar, Andy, you may have dat ar bone. 'Tain't picked up clean." Sam's audience hanging on his words with open mouth, he could not but proceed. "This here matter about persistence, fellow niggers," said Sam, with the air of one entering into an abstruse subject, "this here sistency's thing what ain't seed into very clear by most people. Now, you see, when a feller stands up for a thing one day and night, the contrary the next, folks says, and natural enough they says, why, he ain't persistent. Hand me dat ar bit of corn cake, Andy. But let's look into it. I hope the gentlemen and their fair sex will excuse my using an ordinary sort of parison. Here, I'm a-trying to get a topper to hay. Well, I puts up my larder this 'ere side. 'Tain't no go. Then, 'cause I don't try der no more, but puts my larder right the contrary side. Ain't I persistent? I'm persistent and want to get up which ar side my larder is. Don't you see, all on yer? "It's the only thing you ever was persistent in, Lord knows," muttered Aunt Chloe, who was getting rather restive, the merriment of the evening being to her somewhat after the Scripture comparison, like vinegar upon nitre. "Yes, indeed," said Sam, rising, full of supper and glory, for a closing effort. "Yes, my feller citizens and ladies of the other sex in general, I has principles. I'm proud to own them. They's persequit to these to your times, and ter all times. I has principles, and I sticks to 'em like 40. Just anything that I thinks is principles, I goes ter it. I wouldn't mind if they burnt me live. I'd walk right up to the stake, I would, and say, 'Here I comes to shed my last blood for my principles, for my country, for the general interest of society.'" "Well," said Aunt Chloe, "one of your principles will have to be to get to bed some time tonight and not to be keeping everybody up till morning. Now, every one of you young'uns that don't want to be cracked, it better be scarce mighty sudden. Niggers, all of yer," said Sam, waving his palm leaf with benignity, "I give yer my blessing. Go to bed now, and be good boys." And with this pathetic benediction, the assembly dispersed. End of chapter 8.
All right, that's the end of chapter 8. Sam in this particular narrative is doing the most. I thought he was supposed to be talking about what happened. He wove it into the story about his principles. And, you could just see how a lot of the way in which the those who were oppressing, the thought processes were internalized. And later on, and this is the same, this is a quarrel up until this day. Should you use the N word, using it amongst yourself, what it means, and internalizing your impression and looking at yourself the way the slave master looked at you. So if the slave master said that the mixed person, if you notice in this narrative, when it's talking about a mixed person, it's talking about they're respectful, they're respectable. They don't know nothing about it. Homosexual, their features and their color, and that means that the person is respectful or respectable and well trained. You know what I mean? The closer they are to the European race. But if you are woolly headed or dark skinned, then automatically you're going to be a critter. You're going to be on the lower end of the spectrum. And um, other people began to see, when melanated people began to see, this is the response that the European got, that if you were of one persuasion, you got better treatment, supposedly, quote unquote, then they began to internalize that and think that of themselves. And we still deal with that very issue on to this day. So these are some of the things we can, um, you know, pick up and just look at it as it was happening, as they were creating these mindsets, and how it trickled on down onto this day, and the things that you use to curse one another, to try to belittle one another. You say, like Martin and Pam, you talk about BDBs, you talk about woolly hair, you talk about dark skin, you talk about all of the things that the slave master was talking about to try to make one feel bad about themselves. It's still happening in today's space and time. Um, Queen T says Sam's just stop. Jason says Sam Jackson, the head house ninja. Trisha says to deliver a speech. He's delivering his whole, because he's jockeying for position. This is another thing. Because it's you against me, because people are trying to move towards the person with the power, the person who had the ability to do X, Y, and Z, then it wasn't about necessarily camaraderie. It's about every man for himself, because that's what the environment created. It created a every man for themselves type of way. I'm going to run to freedom for myself. I'm going to try to make it for myself. You know what I mean? And so Sam is like, what? Sam's, he didn't even have no time to mourn, like, oh man, I'm gonna miss Tom, or I'm sorry to hear that. He was like, what? Tom is about to be out. Let me, I mean, let me position myself to get some of his benefits. Yeah, he is a hot mess. He is a hot mess. But again, this is, like I said, there was one thing that was in that underground narrative that always stuck with me. There's no right way to be a slave. This is what they were saying. Everybody's equally under oppression. You have all these different personalities that deal with oppression. It's like dealing with pressure. People deal with pressure differently. That's just reality. Everybody has different pain tolerances. So one might say that, this person is stronger, this person is weaker, but it's all about how people deal with pressure, how people deal with oppression. And everybody's not cut from the same cloth. Everybody's not about that life. So some people don't like pain. So if those some people who don't like pain, the thought of them getting beat, or the thought of them getting whipped, or the thought of them being put outdoors was not favorable. So in their mind, listen, I'm gonna do what I need to do to get along. You have the other person who says, listen, I don't care. Like George. George says, no matter how many times you whip me, I don't care. I'm not going to bow. I'm not going to conform. So with that type of individual, for them, they will do whatever it takes to stay off the plantation or run away. But we judge. I mean, it's wild because it's still happening to a certain degree. But when you kind of like step back from it, you understand that different souls basically have different tolerances. There's some who was like, yo, I'll never be a slave, and they walked right back into the water and committed suicide. They talk about that at Ebo Landing. They talk about those who walked off the boats in the middle of the Atlantic. They talk about, I read narratives and real life narratives of women who took the lives of their children because they refused for their children to come into slavery, and well, they took their own lives. You know what I mean? So these is all of the ways in which they tried to resist their oppression, and it looks different for different people because they're different personalities and they're different tolerances and they're different. So if we, it's difficult to say that. It's like jail. People react differently in jail. whoever's being hard in the streets and carrying on and this, that, and that. When you look at the Khalif Browder story that Jay-Z executive produced, it was on Netflix, came out a couple of years ago. When you look at what that young man went through, um, being such a young man on being innocent and being into one of the toughest jails, right? And when he comes out, he's not able to adapt. He's not able to adjust. You know what I mean? And he takes himself out. And then when you look at the Central Park Five, when they see us, also, oh man, that film, I think last year was just a year for me. Like that film, like I felt that to my core. Like that tore me up. Just experiencing it while they're experiencing it in the film. You know what I mean? That film had me done for a minute. And each one of them adapted differently to what they were experiencing. And the last brothers, what's his name? The last one, I forgot his name, who wasn't even his name in the film, who wasn't even around. He didn't have anything to do with it. His story touches you the most because he doesn't have any idea of why he's even in this predicament, other than the fact that he was trying to be there for his friend. So I know a lot of people say they couldn't watch but that to me is kind of like the slave narratives. It's very difficult to watch, but I felt like to me, I owed them. It was difficult for them to experience. You know what I'm saying? And some of the hurt and so Corey, that's his name. Thank you, Corey. Corey Booker, if I'm not no, not Corey Booker. Corey Booker is the name of the guy that's running. Corey is his name. Corey Wise, I think his name is Corey Wise. And so, his story, man, that thing hit me. That show had me out of commission for a minute. Like I was like crying uncontrollably. Like that pain that's still inside of us, that feeling, that injustice, that that all of that we share that communally. You know what I mean? And it comes out in the way we express or don't express, in the way we get along or don't get along, in the way we progress or don't progress. And I think spaces like this where we can have those real life conversations and understand that it's okay, because if it's in there, it's going to do just as much harm. You know what I'm saying? So any of this stuff, it has to find its way out. We have to give voice to it. We have to birth it, even if it's stillbirth. You cannot hold, and I've had a stillbirth. So again, I'm talking from what I know. When you're carrying life, or you're carrying, in this case, emotions, or you're carrying um, experience, and you don't allow it to be birthed, and you don't allow the process to pass normally, and you don't allow the burial, you don't allow the mourning, it stays with you and it can fester. Now in real life, the body aborts a stillbirth. The body now knows that it's no longer beneficial, it's no longer a viable life, and the body will begin to go into labor to expel this entity that is no longer thriving. But well, melanated people are carrying the stillbirth of the trauma, of the experience, and it's now causing the toxicity in the system because we're not giving birth to it, because we're told, don't talk about it, or it hurts too much, it's too painful. I mean, like my pain tolerance of being able to go into birth, just to tell you just a little bit of, I understand it's difficult, but we can make it through. I had a stillbirth. I carried the unborn, now deceased child for a week, because they told me you have to wait for your body to go into labor naturally. So for 1 week, this is a true story, I carried my dead child in my womb, knowing that although I showed the signs of pregnancy, I showed the signs of all these things, the life was no longer viable, and I had to carry it in my womb for a week until my body naturally went into labor. And when my body naturally went into labor, the only one that was pushing was me, because when you're going into labor, the baby is pushing from that side, and so if if you get in the zone, then boom, the baby comes out. But in this case, there's no pushing. All of the pushing, all of the expelling is on my behalf. That's hard. You know what I mean? So I'm not telling y'all that, this process of even emotional trauma, birthing these things, and is not hard. It's not difficult to look at. It's not difficult to go through. I know about going through some difficult, dark, valley of the shadow of death type stuff. I know about it. I mean, I don't maybe always talk about it, but I know about it. And I know that on the other side of it, there is light. On the other side of it, there is light. But if we resist and we hold on and we clench up and we choose not to move through, it poisons our system, poisons our communication, it poisons our relationships, it poisons our future and our progress. So I shared that with you to let you know that the person who is speaking is not just speaking from theory, not just speaking from books, not just speaking from what I read, although I speak from there too. I'm speaking from my real life, actual experience of making it through very things that you have no idea when you're looking at it. How am I going to get through this? You know what I'm saying? How am I going to get through this? What you have no idea. For the next second, you don't know what's going to happen. And the Creator is merciful. And here I am today speaking to you. So all praise be to the Creator, right? For each and every day. So with that said, we on 7 and 8. We're gonna come back and do 9. Um, I came on here 3 times today, so y'all know I'm tired. Not like yesterday. Yesterday I had time, but today I'm like, man, shoot. What time is it? It's bedtime up in this GZ. Um, let's see here. Uh, any more questions? Feel free to put in the box. Sam, yep, Sam is a hot mess. Oprah's movie years ago, killing her baby not to be enslaved. That was a form of resistance. That was a form. I have the book. I'm not gonna dig it up now. I'm getting a little tired, but I have the book. I never came and talked about it, so maybe I'll come and talk about different ways that melanated people resisted during slavery. Uh, Yep. So a lot of people said they couldn't watch it. I remember when it came out, a lot of people said they couldn't watch it. When They See Us is the name of the book. I mean, not the name of the book. It was Eva DuVay, I think her name is. When They See Us, I think it came on Netflix. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Teresa, yeah. I mean, if miscarrying a child, this is another thing that a lot of us don't speak about, of your loss, whether you're the father who experienced the loss or you're the mother who firsthand experienced the loss. A lot of us don't think about it, and then we just bury those thoughts, or we bury that experience, and then those fears or those experiences are informing the way we operate, the way we think, the thought processes that we adopt, the limitations that we put on ourselves. We never sometimes get resolved for them, or we don't really understand. And so we go through, you know, putting more hurdles in front of us. And then if we go to a place where they say, just pray it away, just don't think about it, or you know what I mean? And you're the type of person where, well, I'm trying to understand, and you don't have people who are informed or who even could connect with you on that level, then that's just an extra piece of baggage that you carry around. Um, Global Purpose says we're a very strong people, and for someone tell us the classic "Get Over It" hasn't ever felt what we felt. Yeah, the Most High is definitely merciful. The Creator is definitely merciful. Like I said, firsthand, I know that firsthand. You know what I mean? The Creator is merciful, and it's all about the perspective that we take on life. Like the reason why I'm able to look back into these chronicles, look back into slave narratives, look back into all that pain and hurt, is because there's a lesson in there, right? And the reality is we survived because we're here. We survived. We're here. So that's like we're looking at it. Yeah, it's difficult to know that that happened. All of that pain, all of that trauma happened, but we're here. So we survived. We survived in the Caribbean. We survived in South America. We survived in North America. We survived going to Canada. We survived those who are in England. Like we are still here. All praise be to the Creator. So for me, looking back, it's like allowing that pain to make its way through and no longer get stuck. So I can look at things and read things now from a different perspective of learning now that we're still here, now that we survived. Okay, where's the injury? It's like you go to triage or you go to the emergency room. Once they clean up the blood and they be like, wow, you still alive, heartbeat and everything. Now they're gonna put you in either um, intensive care unit, right? Or they're gonna put you. It depends from where you go from there. They're gonna put you someplace else, depending how deep the trauma or the injury is. So the initial part is getting past the emergency room, right? And once you get past the emergency room and you know we still here, you're like, all right, boom. Then you could go visit the person in ICU, or you can go visit the person who's just in regular admissions and be like, okay, now you can kind of process what happened and where are you hurting and is it still hurting? That kind of way. But we can't get past that if we won't even look. You know what I mean? We can't get past that if we won't even commit to, sorry, the process of what happened to you. If we don't ask people what happened to you and how did this happen to you, then it will continue to control us because we fear that. So, we come to the point where we don't fear it no more. We don't have to speak in generalities. We can begin to, that's what I wanted to do with this lead project. We could begin to put a face and a name to a face and not just say in slavery. Yeah, continue. Yes, thank you, Queen T. Give the video a thumbs up so many other people can hear it and share it, and we can grow from this. We don't. We It's like why did they say Sandra Bland? Say her name. Why were they saying that? It's like don't just make her nameless and faceless. Don't make our foreparents and ancestors nameless and faceless. They have names, they have stories. You know what I mean? They have progeny, they have descendants who came from them. They have something to be learned from their experience. And if we turn back to them and we hear what they went through and understood that they still survived because we're still here, and we never forget this is the story. This is how they live on. You know what I mean? And this is how the computer is about to go dead. So the computer goes do 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 do. You already know what time it is. So I find power in it, and I know it takes time. But after you, let me just pull this up. After you acknowledge, this is why when you say you read the Bible, we read the Bible. That Dawid is not dead because you read Dawid's story, and Moses is not dead because you read Moses' story, and Joshua is not dead because you read Joshua's story. So the memory and the thought of these men continue on because you kept the name alive because you're reading the story, right? I will tell you that there are hundreds of thousands of stories that were not only chronicled, they're actually free on the internet. I've shared this how many times? They're free. They have their names, they have their locations, they have their experiences. And when we begin to look at it for what it is, then I think to me, that's going to be like a watershed moment. That's going to be like an opening of uh, the road to facilitating healing, because now you're allowing like your mother to put the peroxide on. Before, you're like scrunching up and you're tightening up and you're like, oh, I can't look at it, it's bleeding and it's hurting and it's graveling, and your mother's trying to tell you, calm down, relax, calm down, relax, let me just clean the cutout, let me put the peroxide on it, you know what I mean, let me bandage it up, let me clean it up. And once you do that and you relax and you look at it, you be like, okay, yeah, that was bad, but now here's the way we're going to fix it. And so a lot of times on our people in this subject, we are like so tight and so constricted that we won't even look at it. But the reality is it happened. So whether you look at it or not, it's not going away. So might as well look at it so you can grow through it and then get to the other side. And then people can't use it as a trigger anymore. You know what I mean? People can't use it as something that they're going to come for you anymore, because the reality is many other people know way more than we do. Way more. They're the ones who chronicle it. They had a whole writer's project. I'll leave it at this. There's a whole writers project. I shared this before. If you look up, I'm gonna tell you exactly what to look up. The I just saw it come up on my other computer. It's called the Federal Writers Project. It was from 1936 to 1938. Contains more than 2,300 first person accounts of slavery and 500 black and white photographs of former slaves collected as part of the Federal Writers Project of the Works Progress Administration. Okay? If you go to loc.gov, you will begin to see their voices, their semblances, okay, their stories, their histories, their moments of how they got over, their joys, their pains, and you begin to give back the humanity. Because it was an inhumane practice, but within it, many of melanated people were able to still hold a level of humanity in the way in which they experience this inhumane practice. So give them an opportunity to say what they got to say. I've learned a lot and I will continue to learn a lot, and prayerfully, you continue to allow me. Yeah, the Federal Writers Project. That's the name of it. So with that said, I want to thank everybody for tuning in. We'll come back tomorrow. And what I've done with that too, because the internet is here today, gone tomorrow. They have them in PDF files. And so I click them. I have it on my other computer because it just popped up today. I'm gonna put it. I have some on my with USB. You put it on your little disk thing. You can download them, and you just load up your discs. You know what I mean? So everybody could pull it down because a lot of people don't even realize this is here. They have Arkansas, from Georgia, from Florida, Indiana, Kansas, Kentucky, Maryland, Mississippi, Missouri, North Carolina, Ohio, Oklahoma, South Carolina, Tennessee, Texas, Virginia. And so what I've done over the years is just click it. I get the PDF, I save it. Just go through saving. There's so much I haven't even read, but I know that there's value in learning what they have experienced. So once again, thank you, Queen T. Thumbs up before you leave. Share the videos because eventually we're all gonna have to come to this point. The reparation conversation. This is the key of the reparations conversation. This is where it's coming from. This is what the need to even have the reparations conversation. HR 40, ADOS conversation, FBA conversation. This is where it's at. But I don't really hear anybody except for in passing. I don't really hear like a big focus and concentration on, okay, let's bring back the humanity to them by actually hearing what they went through. Not just one off person, oh, Frederick Douglass. I mean, there's thousands of people who share their experiences. So that's just my thoughts on that. So we'll come back listening to and listening to Uncle Tom's Cabin. See what's popping off with Eliza, that suspect Haley and his slave catching boys, and what so-called Black Sam is going to be doing in the coming pages of this here narrative. So if that's it, everybody have a blessed day. See you guys tomorrow. Enjoy and be safe. All right.